There's a black teenager outside my house, and he looks like he's about to break in. Margaret Whitmore whispered the words into her phone like she was reporting a fire, but across the street, 15-year-old Ethan Brooks was only standing on his own front porch, patting the pocket of his jeans for the house key he had dropped somewhere between the mailbox and the door. The late October air in Maple Ridge carried the smell of cut grass, damp leaves, and someone's barbecue cooling in a backyard 2 houses down. It was the kind of quiet suburban evening people bought with 30-year mortgages and white picket promises, the kind of street where porch lights glowed amber before sunset and every lawn looked measured with a ruler. Ethan bent down near the welcome mat, lifting one corner, then the other, his black hoodie pulled over his shoulders against the chill. He did not see Margaret standing behind her lace curtains in the blue-gray house across the street, one hand holding the curtain open, the other gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. "Yes, I've called before," she said, lowering her voice as if the neighborhood itself might overhear her. "It's the same house. The new people. I don't feel safe." 3 minutes later the calm broke. Red and blue lights slid over the parked cars, over the trimmed hedges, over the pale siding of the Brooks home. The patrol car slowed at the curb, its tires whispering against the asphalt. Ethan froze with one hand still near the flower pot where he had just spotted the tiny brass edge of his key. He knew that sound now. He knew the low engine, the soft click of a car door, the way neighbors suddenly found reasons to look out their windows. His shoulders tightened before anyone spoke. Slowly, almost automatically, he lifted both hands into the air. The key glittered on the porch beside his sneaker, useless and small. Officer Daniel Price stepped out first, young, clean-shaven, his expression caught somewhere between duty and embarrassment. This was not his first time on Briar Hollow Lane. It was not even his 5th. Behind him, another officer scanned the yard with the practiced caution of someone arriving. Inside a story someone else had already written. Ethan swallowed hard. "I live here," he said, but the words came out thin, swallowed by the radio chatter and the blinking lights. The front door opened before the officer could answer. Naomi Brooks stepped onto the porch in a gray cardigan, still wearing the soft canvas shoes she used in the kitchen. She had been making tomato soup, the kind Ethan liked with extra pepper and toasted cheese on the side. Steam still clung faintly to her sleeves. She stopped when she saw her son's hands raised under the police lights. For 1 second, nothing in her moved. Not her mouth. Not her hands. Not even her breath. Across the street, Margaret stood on her porch now, arms folded over a cream sweater, chin lifted just enough to look concerned without looking satisfied. A few neighbors watched from behind glass doors. No one came outside. Naomi's eyes moved from the officers to Ethan, then down to the key near his foot. She understood the whole picture before anyone explained it. Her boy had been turned into a threat while standing at his own front door. She walked down the steps slowly, each footfall quiet against the wood, and placed herself beside him without touching him too fast, because she knew what sudden movement could become in the wrong imagination. "Ethan," she said calm and low, "look at me." His eyes found hers, wide and wet with the effort not to cry. "I was just trying to get inside," he whispered. Naomi nodded once, the smallest movement, but it steadied him. Officer Price cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we received a report of a suspicious person attempting to enter the residence." Naomi looked at him, then at the house behind her, the porch light glowing over the family name newly painted on the mailbox. "Brooks. This is his residence," she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. That somehow made the sentence heavier. Margaret shifted across the street, her slipper scraping softly against the concrete. "I only called because he was lurking," she called out, loud enough for the block to hear. "People have a right to be careful." Ethan's jaw tightened. Naomi felt it before she saw it, the small tremor of a child learning that being careful could become a weapon when pointed at him. She reached her hand toward him, palm open, not restraining him, just reminding him that he was not alone. "Pick up your key," she said gently. Ethan lowered one hand, slowly, painfully aware of every watching eye, and took the key from the porch. The metal clicked against his palm like a tiny verdict. Officer Price glanced at the house, then back at Naomi. Something like recognition flickered across his face, but it was not enough to become courage. "Not yet. We'll clear the call," he said. Naomi gave a single nod. No thank you. No apology offered. No apology received. The patrol car lights finally went dark, and the street returned to its soft, expensive silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It had weight now. It sat on the lawns, on the windows, on Ethan's lowered shoulders. Margaret remained on her porch a moment longer, watching as if she had simply maintained order. Naomi guided Ethan inside, closed the door behind them, and only then let her hand rest against the wood. In the kitchen, the soup had begun to cool. On the table, 2 bowls waited untouched beneath the yellow light. Ethan stood in the hallway, still holding the key so tightly it left a red mark across his palm. Naomi looked through the small front window and saw Margaret's curtain move again, a pale flutter in the dark. This was the 21st call. And for the first time since moving to Maple Ridge, Naomi Brooks knew the next one would not end on Margaret Whitmore's terms. Inside the house, the quiet did not feel like safety. It felt like everyone outside had left their eyes behind. Ethan stood in the hallway with his backpack still on one shoulder, the brass key pressed into his palm, his face turned away from the front window. Naomi closed the blinds gently, not because she was hiding, but because her son deserved one room in this neighborhood where he did not feel watched. The kitchen smelled of tomatoes, black pepper, and butter browning on the edge of the skillet. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches sat on a plate, cut diagonally the way Ethan had liked since he was 6, but he did not reach for them. He only stared at the red line across his hand where the key had bitten into his skin. Naomi wanted to hold him. She wanted to say the perfect thing, the sentence that would put his shoulders back where they belonged. But mothers in her position learned early that some wounds did not close because of comfort. Some wounds needed truth spoken softly. Sit with me, she said. Ethan dropped into the chair across from her. The yellow light above the table made him look younger than 15, younger than the boy who had learned to keep receipts in stores, to lower his hood before entering elevators, to smile first so adults would not decide his silence meant danger. Naomi placed a bowl in front of him and sat down. For a while, the only sound was the spoon touching ceramic and the low hum of the refrigerator. Why does she keep doing this? Ethan asked finally. His voice was not angry now. That made it worse. It sounded tired in a way no child should sound. Naomi folded her hands on the table. Because some people feel safer when they can decide who belongs. Ethan looked toward the covered window. But this is our house. Yes, Naomi said. It is. He swallowed. Then why do I feel like I have to prove it every time I step outside? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Naomi had answered frightened residents, grieving parents, city council members, reporters hungry for clean statements after messy nights. She had stood in precinct halls at 2 in the morning with rain on her coat and responsibility sitting heavy on her chest. But there was no official language for a boy asking why his own front porch had become a checkpoint. She reached across the table, not too quickly, and covered his hand with hers. You should not have to prove you are harmless to be treated like you are human. Ethan blinked fast, fighting tears with the pride of a teenager who hated needing them. Naomi let him fight. She did not tell him to be strong. The world had already asked too much strength from him. When they first moved to Maple Ridge 6 weeks earlier, Naomi had believed the street might give him space to breathe. The old apartment near downtown Charlotte had been tight, loud, and full of memories from a season they both needed to outgrow. Maple Ridge had trees that arched over the road, a high school with a robotics team, sidewalks wide enough for evening walks, and a backyard where Ethan could set up his telescope. Naomi had chosen the house after seeing the oak tree out front, its branches wide and patient, shading the porch like something built to protect. She had not brought her framed commendations. She had not hung photographs of ceremonies or uniforms or handshakes with city officials. Her badge stayed in a small wooden box inside the kitchen drawer, wrapped in dark cloth beside an old photograph of her father in his church suit. At work, people called her Captain Brooks. At home, she wanted to be Mom. She wanted Ethan to know dinner before duty, homework before headlines, porch lights before patrol lights. But Margaret Whitmore had noticed them the first afternoon, standing stiffly beside her mailbox while the moving truck unloaded boxes. She had smiled at Naomi with only half her mouth and asked whether they were renting. When Naomi said she had bought the house, Margaret's eyes moved to the roof, the driveway, the clean brick walkway, as if searching for a mistake in the paperwork. After that came the little things. A welcome note never delivered. A homeowners association email about trash bins sent only to Naomi. A warning about unknown visitors after Naomi's brother stopped by with a casserole. Then came the calls. First for music that was not loud. Then for a car parked legally by the curb. Then for Ethan walking home with 2 classmates after basketball practice. Each time Naomi stayed calm. Each time she wrote down the date, the hour, the officer's name, and what Margaret had claimed. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew patterns mattered. In policing, 1 call could be fear. 2 could be confusion. 21 was a record of intent. Across the table, Ethan stirred his soup but did not eat. "Do they know?" he asked. Naomi looked at him. "Know what?" He nodded toward the drawer where the wooden box rested out of sight. "About you." Naomi followed his glance, then looked back at her son. "Some people at the department know where I live. Margaret does not. Why not just tell her?" Because respect that only appears after a title was never respect. Ethan sat with that, his spoon still in his hand. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights sliding across the blinds like pale fingers. He flinched before he could stop himself. Naomi saw it, and something inside her went very still. She had moved here to give him peace, not another lesson in caution. She stood, carried the untouched sandwiches to the counter, and turned down the stove. The soup had gone lukewarm. The whole kitchen had. Ethan pushed back his chair and whispered, "I am going to my room." Naomi nodded. "I will check on you in a bit." He paused at the hallway. "Mom." "Yes. Was I wrong to put my hands up?" Naomi's throat tightened, but her voice stayed even. "No, baby. You were trying to come home safe." He nodded once and disappeared down the hall. Naomi remained alone under the yellow light. Slowly, she opened the kitchen drawer and touched the wooden box, feeling the cool edge beneath her fingertips. She did not open it yet. She only stood there listening to the house settle, to her son's door close, to the silence pressing against the windows. For 6 weeks she had chosen patience. But patience, she knew, was not the same as permission. By sunrise, Margaret Whitmore had already opened the neighborhood email list, typed the word concern in the subject line, and convinced herself that concern made everything she did sound noble. Her kitchen looked like a magazine page from another decade, white cabinets polished without fingerprints, copper pans hanging above the island, a bowl of green apples arranged more carefully than most people arranged flowers. A small brass plaque near the back door read Maple Ridge Neighborhood Watch, Chairperson Margaret A. Whitmore. She had ordered it herself 12 years earlier, after the Homeowners Association voted her into the role no one else wanted badly enough to fight for. To Margaret, the plaque was not decoration. It was proof. Proof that she knew the street better than anyone. Proof that safety had a voice, and that voice sounded like hers. She sat with a cup of black coffee cooling beside her laptop and reviewed the message one more time. "Dear neighbors, last night there was another incident involving suspicious activity near the Brooks property. Please remain alert and report anything unusual." She paused over the word Brooks. It looked too ordinary on the screen, too clean, too respectable. That bothered her more than she would ever admit. 6 weeks earlier, when the moving truck had arrived, Margaret had stood by her hydrangeas and watched 2 men carry in a sofa, a bookshelf, a telescope case, and a framed painting wrapped in brown paper. Naomi had stepped out of a dark blue sport utility vehicle wearing jeans, a plain sweater, and the calm expression of a woman who did not feel the need to ask permission. That calm had irritated Margaret immediately. New people usually waved too much, apologized for the truck, asked where to put trash bins, tried to earn their place with small offerings of humility. Naomi had only smiled politely and said good afternoon. She had not explained herself. She had not seemed grateful to be there. Margaret remembered asking, "Are you renting?" in the light tone people used when they wanted a question to sound harmless. Naomi had looked directly at her and answered, "No, ma'am. We bought the house." The ma'am had been respectful, but not submissive. Margaret had heard the difference. Since then, she had watched the Brooks home the way some people watched weather radar. Lights on after 10 o'clock. A visitor with Georgia plates. Ethan riding his bicycle around the block with headphones. Naomi bringing groceries in after work, sometimes in dark slacks and a long coat that looked too formal for someone Margaret had decided should be ordinary. Each detail became a note in the small spiral notebook Margaret kept beside the landline. It had started years ago as a neighborhood safety log after a package theft 2 streets over. Now it had become something else, though she never named it that. Naming things gave them shape. Margaret preferred fog. She preferred phrases like quality of life, community standards, and public safety. Those words looked better than fear. They sounded cleaner than resentment. At 9 o'clock, her friend Linda Carver called from 2 houses down. Margaret put her on speaker and straightened the napkin beneath her coffee mug. "I saw the patrol car last night," Linda said. "Was everything all right?" Margaret sighed long and careful. "I wish I could say yes. That boy was outside in a hood, acting strange near the door." "His own door?" Linda asked. Margaret's mouth tightened. "That is not the point. You cannot be too careful anymore." She looked through the kitchen window toward the Brooks home. The curtains were closed. That felt like defiance to her, though any other family would have simply been enjoying privacy. "I am only trying to protect this neighborhood," she added. And there it was, the sentence she used whenever doubt came too close. Protect. It made suspicion sound generous. It made watching sound responsible. It made calling the police feel like a civic duty instead of a habit sharpened by prejudice. Linda was quiet for a moment. "Maybe they just want to settle in." Margaret gave a small laugh without humor. People who want to settle in usually make an effort. But what she meant was that Naomi had not performed gratitude. Ethan had not made himself smaller. Their house had not looked temporary enough. Across the street, Naomi opened her front door and stepped onto the porch with a trash bag in one hand. She wore the same gray cardigan from the night before, her face composed, her movements unhurried. For a brief second, Margaret expected her to look over, to show embarrassment, anger, something that would confirm the story Margaret had been telling herself. Naomi did not. She simply placed the bag in the bin, adjusted the lid, and rested one hand on Ethan's bicycle to move it farther from the walkway. The gesture was ordinary, quiet, domestic. Margaret hated that it looked innocent. She ended the call with Linda and returned to her email. Her finger hovered over send. Outside, a school bus groaned to a stop at the corner, brakes sighing in the cool morning air. Ethan came out with his backpack, shoulders stiff, eyes down. Naomi stood in the doorway behind him, watching until he reached the sidewalk. Margaret saw the boy glance once toward her house and then away quickly, as if the windows themselves could accuse him. Something in that glance should have softened her. Instead, it made her feel exposed. She pressed send. The message flew out to 42 households beneath the polished banner of community safety. Then Margaret closed her laptop, lifted her coffee, and told herself she had done the right thing. But across the street, Naomi's porch light remained on even after Ethan disappeared around the corner. A small gold circle burning in daylight, steady as a witness. By late afternoon, the email Margaret had sent was no longer just an email. It had become a feeling on Briar Hollow Lane, thin and cold, moving from mailbox to mailbox without anyone needing to say much out loud. Naomi sensed it when she parked in the driveway after work and saw Mrs. Palmer from the corner pause with her gardening gloves halfway off, then turn back toward her roses as if she had forgotten something urgent. She sensed it when a man walking a golden retriever crossed to the other side of the street before reaching the Brooks house. She sensed it most clearly when Ethan came home from school 30 minutes later with his hood down despite the wind, his backpack hanging low, his eyes scanning windows instead of trees. He did not mention the email. He did not need to. The neighborhood had already spoken in small movements. Naomi was carrying grocery bags from the back of her sport utility vehicle when a white delivery van rolled slowly along the curb, its hazard lights blinking amber. The driver, a thin black teenager in a red vest, stepped out with a package tucked under one arm and checked the address on his phone. He could not have been more than 17. His name tag read Marcus. He looked confused, turning first toward Margaret's house, then toward the Carver home next door, where 2 identical brick mailboxes sat close enough to make any address easy to mix up. Naomi saw him smile politely and walk up Margaret's driveway with the package. Before he reached the porch, Margaret opened the door. She did not step outside. She stood framed by it, one hand on the knob, the other holding her phone already raised. "Can I help you?" she asked, each word clipped clean. Marcus stopped at the bottom step. "Yes, ma'am. I have a delivery for number 418. It might be yours." Margaret looked at the box, then at him, then past him toward Naomi, who had gone still beside her open trunk. "I did not order anything," Margaret said. "And you should not be wandering around private property." Marcus blinked, startled. "I am sorry, ma'am. The app sent me here. I can check again." He lowered his eyes to the phone, thumb moving quickly, trying to fix a mistake before it became something larger. Margaret stepped onto the porch now. "Do not play games with me. I know what marking houses looks like." The words seemed to tighten the air. Marcus lifted his head slowly. "Marking houses? For later," Margaret said, loud enough for the sidewalk to hear. "I was not born yesterday." Across the street, Ethan had just reached the driveway. Naomi saw his face change. The tiredness from the night before flashed into something sharper. Not rage, but recognition. Another boy. Another ordinary moment being bent into suspicion. Naomi set the grocery bags down on the pavement. One held eggs and the carton shifted softly, but she did not look down. She crossed the street at an even pace, not hurried, not hesitant. Cars whispered past at 25 miles per hour. A wind moved dry leaves along the gutter. Marcus saw her coming and looked relieved before he even knew why. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "This does not concern you, Mrs. Brooks." Naomi stopped beside Marcus, leaving enough space so the boy would not feel surrounded. Her voice came calm, low, and steady. "It concerns me when a child is being accused of something he did not do." Margaret gave a tight smile. "He is not a child. He is a stranger on my property." Marcus held up the package with both hands. "I am just delivering this. I can leave it wherever the app says." Naomi glanced at the label. "It is for 419, not 418. That is Mrs. Carver's address." She pointed gently to the brick mailbox next door. "The numbers are faded. Anyone could misread them." For one brief second, the truth sat plainly in front of everyone. A simple mistake. A package. A faded number. A boy doing his job. Margaret could have let it end there. She could have laughed awkwardly, accepted the correction, gone back inside. Instead, embarrassment hardened into authority. "You people always have an explanation," she said. The sentence fell quiet, but it did not fall softly. Marcus looked down at his shoes. Ethan stopped at the edge of the Brooks lawn, his hands curled around the straps of his backpack. Naomi felt her heartbeat slow, the way it did in rooms where one wrong tone could turn a situation into a record. She turned fully toward Margaret. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, and the name carried more weight than anger would have. "You do not get to turn fear into authority." Margaret's face flushed. "Excuse me. A delivery driver is not a threat, because you decided he does not belong on your steps. My son is not suspicious because he stands on his own porch. And I am not going to stand across the street and watch you dress prejudice up as neighborhood safety." The street went still around them. Somewhere behind a screen door, someone stopped moving. Marcus held the package against his chest as if it had become fragile. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since Naomi had moved in, the polished words did not arrive quickly enough. Naomi looked at Marcus and softened her voice. "Go ahead and deliver the package, sweetheart." Marcus nodded, almost whispering, "Thank you, ma'am," and walked quickly to Mrs. Carver's porch. Ethan watched him go, something in his shoulders loosening and tightening at the same time. Margaret lifted her phone higher. "You just threatened me," she said. Naomi did not move. "No, ma'am. I corrected you. I know what I heard." "Then write it down accurately." Margaret's hand trembled slightly, but her chin rose. She looked past Naomi at the windows, at the lawns, at the invisible audience she believed still belonged to her. "This is exactly the problem," she said, her voice louder now. "People cannot even protect their own homes without being attacked." Naomi studied her for a long second. There was no victory in the moment. Only sadness, clean and heavy. Margaret was not afraid of danger. She was afraid of being wrong in public. Naomi turned away first. She crossed back to her driveway, picked up the grocery bags and handed one to Ethan. He took it without speaking. Behind them, Margaret remained on her porch, phone pressed to her ear now, her voice low but urgent. Naomi heard only pieces as she opened her front door. Hostile. Threatening. The Brooks woman. Inside, the house smelled faintly of laundry soap and tomato soup from the night before. Ethan set the grocery bag on the counter and looked at his mother. She is calling again, is she not? Naomi closed the door gently. Through the small glass pane, the street looked peaceful enough to fool anyone who had not been standing in it. Yes, she said. Ethan swallowed. What are we going to do? Naomi looked toward the kitchen drawer where the wooden box waited in silence. Then she looked back at her son. This time, she said, we are going to let the truth keep its own record. The patrol cars came just after dark, when the trash bins were already lined at the curb and the first cold stars had begun to show above the oak trees. Naomi was upstairs folding laundry when she heard the low roll of engines outside, followed by the soft crackle of a police radio drifting through the window screen. She did not need to look to know where they had stopped. Downstairs, Ethan had taken the recycling out 5 minutes earlier, still wearing his school sweatshirt, one earbud hanging loose, the other tucked into his pocket because Naomi had taught him never to meet officers with music in his ears. By the time she reached the front hall, red and blue light was already washing over the walls, turning family photographs into flashes of color. She opened the door and saw Ethan standing beside the driveway, both hands visible, his face tight with embarrassment. Officer Daniel Price stood a few feet away with his notepad open, speaking carefully, while another officer looked toward the side yard where the bins sat in a neat row. Across the street, Margaret Whitmore stood beneath her porch light in a camel-colored coat, holding her phone against her chest like evidence. He was behind the house, Margaret called. I saw him moving around in the dark. Ethan turned his head toward Naomi, his voice breaking before he could stop it. Mom, I was taking out the recycling. The blue bin stood beside him with the lid still open. A flattened cereal box rested on top, bright yellow under the police lights. The scene was so ordinary it hurt. Naomi stepped down from the porch, slow and measured, her palms open at her sides. She saw Officer Price notice her composure. She also saw the fatigue in his eyes, the kind that comes when a person knows a call is wrong but still follows the path it creates. Good evening, Officer Price, she said. He swallowed. Good evening, ma'am. We received a report of someone moving around the side of the residence. This is our residence. Yes, ma'am. The answer came too quickly, too quietly. Ethan looked at him then, not angry, just wounded. Then why am I standing out here like I did something? No one answered fast enough. The silence spread across the lawn, over the damp grass, under the perfect porch lights of Maple Ridge. A curtain shifted at the Palmer house. Someone across the street dimmed a television but did not close the blinds. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharpening. This is what I mean. Every time there is a concern, they make it about something else. Naomi turned to her. Mrs. Whitmore, my son took out the recycling. At night. At 7:15. Behind the house. Beside his own garage. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. You can twist words all you want. Naomi felt Ethan move beside her. The small forward motion of a boy pushed too far by being treated as a problem before being treated as a person. Without looking away from Margaret, Naomi lifted one hand slightly, and Ethan stopped. That single gesture carried years of lessons, years of caution, years of a mother teaching her child how to survive other people's assumptions without letting those assumptions become his character. Officer Price closed his notepad. There appears to be no issue here. We will clear the call. But the words did not repair what had already happened. They did not take back the lights on Ethan's face or the neighbors watching, or the way his shoulders had folded inward as if the street itself had become too narrow for him. Margaret gave a brittle laugh. So that is it? I report suspicious activity, and now I am the problem. For the first time that night, Naomi's calm changed temperature. It did not become anger. It became something colder and clearer. She looked at Margaret, then at Officer Price, then at every dark window pretending not to watch. No one said you were the problem, Naomi said. But 22 emergency calls against the same family, with no crime, no threat, and no evidence is no longer caution. It is a pattern. Officer Price's eyes flicked up. The number landed. Margaret's face went still. She had not expected Naomi to be counting. Ethan looked at his mother, surprised through the hurt. Naomi took one breath, deep and controlled, then turned to her son. "Go inside, baby." He hesitated. "Mom, I am right behind you." Ethan walked up the steps, each footfall heavy against the wood. At the door, he paused and looked back at the police car, at Margaret, at the quiet street that had learned to watch him before learning his name. Then he went inside. Naomi remained on the walkway a moment longer. Officer Price shifted his weight, ashamed now, though shame without action was only another kind of silence. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I am sorry for the inconvenience." Naomi looked at him. "This is not inconvenience. This is my child learning that his own neighborhood can turn him into a call for service." The officer had no answer. Across the street, Margaret stepped back into the square of porch light, smaller now but still unwilling to bend. Naomi turned away before Margaret could speak again. Inside, the house was dim except for the kitchen lamp. Ethan stood by the counter, staring at nothing, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to open a bottle of water. Naomi took it from him gently, opened it, and placed it back in his hands. He whispered, "I hate it here." The sentence was quiet, but it broke something. Naomi looked toward the kitchen drawer. The wooden box waited there, holding the part of herself she had kept, hidden because she believed dignity should not need a uniform. Outside, the patrol cars pulled away, their lights fading down Briar Hollow Lane. Naomi listened until the engines disappeared. Then she opened the drawer. The drawer opened with a soft wooden scrape that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. Naomi stood with one hand on the handle and the other resting flat against the counter, feeling the cool stone beneath her palm, letting the silence settle before she reached inside. Ethan remained near the sink, the water bottle untouched in his hand, his eyes fixed on the drawer as if it held an answer he was afraid to need. The small wooden box sat behind a stack of folded dish towels, plain and dark, with a brass latch worn smooth by years of use. Naomi lifted it carefully and placed it on the table. The kitchen lamp made a circle of warm light around it, leaving the corners of the room dim, almost blue. Outside, Briar Hollow Lane had returned to its polished calm. No sirens, no radios, no footsteps on the porch, just the faint ticking of the wall clock and the slow breath of the refrigerator. Naomi opened the latch. Inside lay her badge, wrapped in a square of navy cloth, beside a department identification card, a black pen, and a photograph of her father standing in front of a small church in South Carolina, one hand tucked into his jacket, the other resting on Naomi's shoulder when she was 12 years old. Ethan stepped closer. He had seen the badge before, but never like this, never at the center of the table after the neighborhood had made him feel like a stranger at his own curb. The metal caught the yellow light and threw it back in a thin silver line. Captain Naomi Brooks. The name was engraved clean and certain, as if the world had always known how to say it with respect. Naomi touched the edge of the badge but did not pick it up. For years, she had believed that power used too quickly could become another wall between people. She had watched officers hide behind rank when they should have listened. She had watched citizens shrink in rooms where titles were spoken like weapons. So when she moved here, she decided not to lead with the badge. She wanted Maple Ridge to meet her as a mother, a neighbor, a woman carrying groceries and trimming hedges and reminding her son to take chicken out of the freezer before dinner. She wanted belonging without credentials. She wanted respect without proof. But the street had demanded proof anyway, not of her rank, but of her humanity. Ethan set the bottle down. "Why did you never tell her?" he asked. Naomi looked at the badge, then at him. "Because I should not have to become Captain Brooks for her to stop treating you like a threat." His face tightened. "But maybe if she knew, she would stop." "Maybe," Naomi said. "But that would mean she was afraid of my position, not ashamed of her actions." The words sat between them, heavy and plain. Ethan pulled out the chair and sat across from her. The red mark from the key was still faint across his palm. Naomi noticed it and felt the old ache rise in her chest. The ache of every parent who has to teach a child the shape of danger without stealing the shape of joy. She sat down too slowly because her knees suddenly felt tired. Not old, just tired. 20 years in uniform had taught her how to walk into hard rooms with steady eyes. It had not taught her how to watch her son flinch at headlights. She took the photograph from the box and turned it toward him. Your grandfather used to say dignity is not staying quiet when someone lies about you. Dignity is choosing the truth even when your voice shakes. Ethan studied the picture. Did his voice shake? Naomi smiled faintly, the first soft thing in the room all night. Sometimes. He just kept speaking anyway. Upstairs, the house creaked as the heat came on. Warm air moved through the vent near the floor, carrying the smell of dust and old wood. Ethan rubbed his wrist, then stopped, as if he did not want her to see. Naomi saw. She saw everything. She reached into the box and took out the department identification card. Not the badge. The badge was symbol. The identification was record. Name, rank, unit, years of service. A life that Margaret had never imagined because imagination, in Margaret's hands, had become a locked door. Naomi placed the card beside the notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. Inside were dates, times, report numbers, officer names, and short descriptions written in her careful script. Music complaint, no violation. Unknown vehicle, registered guest. Suspicious teenager, resident child. Delivery driver accused, incorrect address. Recycling bin, no threat. Ethan leaned forward, reading the lines. His eyes widened as the pattern took shape in ink. You wrote down everything. Yes. Were you planning this? Naomi closed the notebook gently. I was hoping I would never need it. Outside, across the street, Margaret's porch light clicked off. The window went dark, but Naomi no longer mistook darkness for peace. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a contact she had not wanted to use for anything personal. Chief Harold Bennett. Her thumb hovered over the name. Not because she was uncertain. Because once truth entered the record, it could not be tucked quietly back into a drawer. Ethan watched her. What happens now? Naomi looked at her son, at the boy who deserved sidewalks without suspicion and porch lights without fear. Her voice was calm when she answered, but something in it had changed. It had the stillness of a door closing behind hesitation. Now we stop treating this like a misunderstanding. She pressed call. The line rang once, then twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered, warm but alert. Captain Brooks. Naomi looked through the kitchen window at the sleeping street. The perfect lawns, the silent houses, the curtain that had moved too many times. Chief, she said, I need to report a pattern. By noon the next day, Margaret Whitmore had turned her complaint into a community meeting. She called it urgent, typed the word in capital letters across the top of her email, and reserved the multipurpose room at the Maple Ridge precinct with the confidence of someone who believed every public room would eventually agree with her. Folding chairs faced a long table beneath fluorescent lights. A coffee urn hissed in the corner. Paper cups sat stacked beside a plate of grocery store cookies no one touched. Margaret arrived early with a red folder tucked under her arm, filled with printed photographs, handwritten notes, and copies of the same email chain she had sent to 42 households. She wore a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and the solemn expression of a woman prepared to be thanked for her vigilance. One by one, neighbors filed in quietly. Linda Carver sat near the back, twisting her wedding ring. Mrs. Palmer kept her purse in her lap and avoided Margaret's eyes. Officer Daniel Price stood near the wall, hands folded in front of him, his face pale with the knowledge that this meeting was no longer just about a difficult caller. It was about every time he had arrived at the Brooks house and let the call define the people standing in front of him. Margaret took her seat at the table and arranged her papers with careful little taps, lining the corners until they were perfect. I appreciate everyone taking this seriously, she said to the room before anyone official had begun. For weeks, I have tried to protect our neighborhood, and I have been made to feel like the problem. No one answered. That silence annoyed her. She had expected murmurs of agreement, grateful nods, someone saying she had only done what others were too afraid to do. Instead, the room held a strange unease, like a storm waiting behind sealed windows. At 12:10, Chief Harold Bennett entered through the side door. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with silver hair cropped close and a voice that never needed volume to hold authority. He carried no folder. He did not need one. The room settled immediately. Thank you for coming, he said. We are here to review a series of repeated emergency calls originating from Briar Hollow Lane. involving the same residence and the same family. Margaret straightened, ready. Chief Bennett, if I may begin, I have documentation. She lifted the red folder slightly. Photographs, times, suspicious activity, and a record of disturbances. Chief Bennett looked at her for a measured second. You will have a chance to speak, Mrs. Whitmore. First, someone from the department will review the call pattern. Margaret blinked. Someone from the department? The side door opened again. Naomi Brooks stepped into the room. In full dress uniform, dark navy pressed clean, badge bright beneath the fluorescent light, nameplate level over her heart. The room changed without a sound. Chairs seemed to stop creaking. Breath seemed to pause in people's throats. Officer Price lowered his eyes. Linda Carver put one hand over her mouth. Margaret's face emptied first of confidence, then color. Naomi walked to the front table with the same calm she had carried on her porch, in her kitchen, across the street beside a frightened delivery boy. Only now the calm had a frame Margaret could not dismiss. Chief Bennett moved aside. For the record, this review will be led by Captain Naomi Brooks. The name struck Margaret like a door closing. Captain. Not Mrs. Brooks. Not the new woman across the street. Not the subject of her calls. Captain Brooks. Naomi placed a slim black binder on the table. She did not look triumphant. She did not smile. Her expression was steady, almost sad, as if the truth deserved dignity even when the room did not. Over the past 6 weeks, she began, emergency services received 22 calls from one residence concerning the Brooks household or individuals interacting with the Brooks household. In every case, responding officers found no crime, no active threat, and no evidence supporting the level of suspicion described. Margaret's fingers tightened around the edge of her red folder. I did not know who you were, she said, the words escaping before she could polish them. Naomi looked at her then. The room seemed to lean toward the answer. That is exactly the issue. The sentence was quiet, but it carried farther than a shout. Naomi opened the binder and turned one page. Respect should not depend on whether the person you are accusing outranks the officer who arrives. Officer Price swallowed hard. Margaret's lips parted, but nothing came out. Naomi continued, each word controlled. A teenager looking for his key was reported as a possible intruder. A family guest was reported as an unknown male. A delivery driver was described as marking houses after misreading a faded address. A child taking out recycling was reported as suspicious movement in the dark. She paused, letting the ordinary details stand beside the extraordinary harm they had caused. The pattern is not public safety. The pattern is bias wearing the language of concern. Margaret shook her head faintly. I was protecting my home. Naomi closed the binder with one hand. The sound was soft, final. No, Mrs. Whitmore. You were reporting blackness and calling it danger. The room went completely still. Outside the narrow windows, traffic moved along the road, distant and normal, but inside, nothing felt normal anymore. Margaret looked around for rescue, for one familiar face willing to carry her version of the story. No one moved. For the first time since Naomi had arrived on Briar Hollow Lane, Margaret Whitmore was not the one defining what everyone else saw. Margaret Whitmore tried to speak, but for the first time in years, the room did not make space for her certainty. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again around words that sounded smaller each time they came out. I never meant for anyone to feel targeted, she said, her voice thin beneath the fluorescent lights. I was simply worried. Anyone would have been worried. Naomi did not interrupt her. That was part of what made it unbearable. She let Margaret hear herself. She let the sentence stand in the center of the room beside 22 calls, a frightened teenager, a delivery boy accused for doing his job, and a family forced to become evidence before being treated as neighbors. Chief Bennett folded his hands on the table. Mrs. Whitmore, emergency services are not a neighborhood preference line. When calls are made repeatedly without valid cause, especially when the language shows a consistent focus on race and belonging, the department has a responsibility to respond differently. Margaret's eyes flicked toward the neighbors. Linda Carver looked down. Mrs. Palmer's face had gone soft with shame. Officer Daniel Price stepped away from the wall, his boots quiet against the tile. He looked not at Naomi first but toward Ethan, who sat in the back row beside his mother's empty chair, hands clasped tightly between his knees. Naomi had not wanted him there at first. Ethan had insisted not to watch Margaret fall apart, not to see his mother in uniform. He had come because he needed to hear adults say out loud that what happened to him was wrong. Officer Price removed his cap and held it in both hands. "Ethan," he said, and the room turned with him. "I owe you an apology. I answered those calls like the caller's fear was the starting point. I should have made the facts the starting point. You were standing at your own home. You were taking out your own recycling. You should not have had to feel like a suspect in your own driveway." Ethan looked down at his hands. For a moment, Naomi saw the boy he used to be. Small sneakers, missing front tooth, believing every uniform meant help. Then he looked up. "Thank you," he said quietly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was only the dignity of receiving what had been overdue. Margaret's chair scraped faintly. "I did not know he was her son at first." Naomi turned back to her. "He should not need to be my son to be treated fairly." The words landed harder than accusation because they left no door open for excuse. Margaret's face folded, not dramatically, not with the kind of tears that ask an audience to rescue them, but with the slow collapse of a person realizing the mirror has finally stopped flattering her. "I thought I was protecting what I built here," she whispered. Naomi's voice softened, but only slightly. "You did not build this neighborhood alone. And protecting a place does not mean deciding who looks like they belong in it." Chief Bennett opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "The department will issue a formal notice regarding misuse of emergency services. Further false or biased calls may result in legal penalties. The Homeowners Association has also been notified that any neighborhood watch activity connected to these incidents must be suspended pending review." Margaret stared at the paper as if it had been written in a language she had never expected to learn. Her title, her plaque, her email list, the little throne she had built out of caution and control, all of it seemed to shrink at once. "Suspended?" she asked. Chief Bennett nodded. "Effective immediately." A murmur passed through the room, not loud but final. Naomi watched Margaret absorb it. There had been a time, not long ago, when part of her might have wanted this moment to feel satisfying. But sitting there with Ethan behind her, with Officer Price's apology still trembling in the air, she felt no joy. Only the sober relief of a door being unlocked after someone had insisted it was never closed. Margaret looked at Naomi, her eyes wet now. "I am sorry," she said. The apology came out awkward, stripped of polish, almost bare. Naomi did not rush to bless it. She knew how often people used apology as an exit sign, a way to leave the room before the harm had to be carried. "An apology is not justice," Naomi said. "It is only the first honest sentence." Margaret lowered her head. This time, no one rescued her from the silence. Chief Bennett explained the next steps in a steady voice. A written record, a community mediation session, implicit bias training for the neighborhood watch volunteers, a review of response procedures for repeated calls from the same complainant. The words were practical, procedural, almost dry. Yet beneath them something human shifted. The burden moved from the Brooks family having to prove innocence to the system having to examine why suspicion had been believed so easily. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped softly and neighbors stood without the usual chatter. Linda Carver approached Ethan near the back row. "I am sorry I did not say anything sooner," she said. Ethan looked at her for a long second. "Me too," he answered. "Not cruel. Just true." Naomi gathered her binder. Margaret remained seated, staring at the formal notice in front of her, one hand resting near the red folder she had brought like a weapon and no longer wanted to touch. As Naomi passed, Margaret whispered, "Captain Brooks." Naomi paused. Margaret swallowed. Naomi. The name sounded different now, less like a label, more like an attempt. Naomi met her eyes. She did not smile. She did not punish her with coldness either. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. Then she walked out with Ethan beside her into the bright white afternoon, where the sun reflected off the windshield of her car and made her badge shine once before she covered it with her hand. A few weeks later, Briar Hollow Lane looked almost the same from a distance. The oak trees still arched over the road. The lawns were still trimmed close. The porch light still came on before dusk, soft gold squares glowing against white doors and brick steps. But the street no longer felt quite as polished, and that made it feel more honest. The Maple Ridge neighborhood watch sign had been taken down from Margaret Whitmore's porch. In its place, there was only an empty hook moving gently in the wind. The first morning after her suspension, no email arrived. The second morning, no warning. By the end of the week, people had begun speaking to one another without waiting for Margaret to decide what the conversation should mean. Mrs. Palmer crossed the street with a bag of lemons from her backyard tree, and left them on Naomi's porch with a note that simply said, "I should have spoken sooner." Linda Carver stopped Ethan near the mailbox and asked about the robotics team, not in the careful voice of someone trying to repair guilt all at once, but in the plain voice of a neighbor asking a boy about school. Ethan answered with one sentence the first time, 3 the second. By the third week, he had started riding his bicycle around the block again, though he still looked toward Margaret's house when he passed it. Healing did not erase memory. It only gave memory somewhere softer to rest. Naomi knew that better than most. She returned her badge to the wooden box after the review was complete, not to hide it, but to let home become home again. Captain Brooks belonged at the precinct in hard meetings, in rooms where policy had to become protection. Naomi belonged in the kitchen with sleeves rolled up, stirring chili on the stove while Ethan argued that cornbread counted as a vegetable if it had corn in the name. One Saturday afternoon, the two of them worked in the front yard under a clean blue sky. Ethan tightened the loose numbers on the mailbox with a small screwdriver, while Naomi planted purple pansies along the walkway. The soil was damp from morning rain, dark beneath her fingers, smelling of roots and iron in new weather. A car rolled by slowly, but it did not stop. No curtain moved. No phone appeared in a window. Ethan noticed too. His shoulders stayed relaxed. That was the first real miracle. Across the street, Margaret's front door opened. Naomi heard it but did not look up right away. Ethan did. His hand paused on the screwdriver. Margaret stepped onto her porch wearing a plain gray sweater. No pearls, no blazer, no polished armor. In one hand she carried a folded paper. In the other a small envelope. She crossed the street slowly, stopping at the edge of the Brooks driveway as if the invisible border she had once guarded now belonged to someone else. "Naomi," she said. Ethan grew very still. Naomi brushed soil from her hands and stood. She did not correct the name. She did not invite her closer either. Margaret looked at Ethan first, then lowered her eyes. "I turned in my resignation from the homeowners committee this morning," she said, holding up the folded paper. "Not just the neighborhood watch. Everything." The wind moved lightly through the oak leaves above them. Naomi waited. Margaret swallowed. "The mediation counselor asked me to write down what I thought I was protecting. I wrote property values, safety, tradition." Her voice thinned on the last word. "Then I had to write what my actions actually protected. Control. Comfort. My own assumptions." Ethan looked away, not out of disrespect, but because some admissions were too private to stare at. Margaret held out the envelope. "This is not to make anything disappear. It is a written apology. To both of you. You do not have to read it." Naomi took the envelope after a moment. It felt light in her hand, too light for all it was supposed to carry. "Thank you," she said. Margaret nodded, eyes wet but steady enough not to ask for pity. "I am learning that being sorry does not make me the person harmed." Naomi studied her face. There was no triumph in it, no easy forgiveness rising like music. Only the quiet recognition that a woman who had once caused harm was, at last, standing without her excuses. "Keep learning," Naomi said. Margaret accepted that like a sentence and a chance at the same time. She stepped back, then crossed the street again, leaving the folded resignation in the community mailbox on the corner before returning to her house. Ethan watched until her door closed. "Do you forgive her?" he asked. Naomi looked down at the pansies, their purple petals trembling in the breeze. "Forgiveness is not a switch," she said. "Sometimes it is a road. Sometimes you walk it slowly. Sometimes you decide not to walk it yet." Ethan nodded, turning the screwdriver once more until the mailbox number sat straight and secure. 417. Clean, visible, undeniable. Naomi knelt beside the flower bed again and pressed soil around the roots. A warm wind moved down Briar Hollow Lane, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass, damp earth, and dinner beginning somewhere in another kitchen. No sirens broke it. No red and blue lights touched the windows. Ethan stepped back to admire the mailbox, then rested his hand on his mother's shoulder for just a second before returning to the porch. Naomi remained by the walkway, her palms covered in soil, the apology envelope lying beside the open bag of mulch. Across the street, Margaret's curtains stayed open. Not watching, just open. The sun lowered behind the oak trees, turning every window gold. And for the first time since they moved in, the silence on Briar Hollow Lane did not feel like judgment. Felt like space. Felt like breath. It felt like a beginning earned not by power, not by fear, but by the quiet strength of truth finally being allowed to stand in the light.